Hello, welcome. Thank you very much for coming to this live cast, this sort of redo, which hopefully will work a little better this time. Just a little bit of story behind this. I actually did a live cast about a week and a half ago. Some of you may have attended that one. And unfortunately, the video from that was actually lost by Kickstarter. It took them a while to get back to me and let me know that it was actually lost, but right away when I logged in to replay it, I only had the 3 minutes where I was scrabbling around with the camera beforehand and not actually the rest of it. So what I'm going to do in this live cast is I'm going to go through each of the books. This one here that I've got on the table is the Era of the Consortium Rulebook Primer, but I've got a huge stack of them just off camera over here. And I am going to show them all to you. I'm going to give you an idea of what each one has going for it and what the benefits are of one kind over another, and why on earth the definitive edition is better than the core rulebook and so on. I'm also then going to go through all of the existing expansions, and then I'm going to talk briefly about the upcoming expansions. Although I'm not going to have anything to show you because I haven't had any of those printed yet. I've been working hard on them today. So I'm going to start with the Era of the Consortium Rulebook Primer. Now this is the sort of the basic version of the book for anyone who wants it, but don't be fooled by that. The production values, which I'm so proud of in Era of the Consortium, have absolutely been maintained into this book with the layout done by Keith Draws. What this book offers is a sort of a limited view of the game in general, and what it's really designed for is as a sort of a player handbook or a guide for a GM who sort of wants to try out the game but isn't sure they want to commit for the entire rulebook. This comes to about £10. It's about 40 pages long, and I'm now going to go through what it contains. So it starts with the map of the Era of the Consortium solar systems. That is Sulis, Damara, and Ecaunus, all of which have very much got their place in the history as they explore. And I'm struggling to turn the page, sorry about that. We then go on to a quick section about the basics of the story. This is a 2-page summary of the entire 500 years of history, told from the perspective of Gweya, who is one of the main characters in the story. Now, it discusses a few of the things about the Kamaja, which was the first ship to launch from Earth, and also goes into a little bit of detail about what happened on the journey, at least a speculation of that, because no one really knows is the reality. And he sort of covers, in very brief terms, the history of the Consortium and talks about the formation of the Resistance and his own goals, because he's one of the most powerful characters in the Consortium. He runs one of the big 8. Now, it goes on after that to give you a quick summary of the current situation in 2 CE, which is the beginning of the time travel campaign. Now, I should say, just at this stage, this Rulebook Primer is actually compatible with all of the expansions that we are creating. You need absolutely nothing more, with one exception, and that is the upcoming free trader, where we recommend, while you could play it with just this, we recommend that you have the core rulebook, because this book does not contain the space combat rules for Era of the Consortium. So we have a full briefing on the 2 CE situation, and I'll cover the time travel campaign books in a moment. And then we have a summary of the current situation for 447 CE, which is the end of the 500-year history in the core rulebook, and the point at which you will leap in if you want to play about the Resistance and the Consortium and their particular battle, if you want to play that. Next, we've got a few pages of the major factions, but not all of the factions. We've got Hayden Bank, which is the most powerful faction in the Consortium, the most powerful of the big 8. We've got Smirtios Security, which is the company that most of the mooks work for. We've got Open Technology, who are not the most profitable company, but a very powerful one. We've got the Senate of the Consortium, which is the ruling body, which in theory controls the big 8, but in practice does not. And we've got a double page on the Resistance, because we feel that you do need to know all about those. And down at the bottom here of that, we've got a few bits of information about Stiletto Unit and Scimitar Unit, 2 of the particularly prominent Resistance units. It goes on to character creation. So character creation, we've got the full summary right here. And then here we've got the race choices. Now, in this version of the book, there are quite limited race choices. You can be human. You can be one kind of Eulutian. There are 2 kinds. You can be one kind of Zimian. There are 3 kinds. And you cannot play as a Velithi using the Rulebook Primer for character creation. Now, if you have a campaign book that does feature a Velithi character, that is no longer the case. We do have some. I believe Sirona Specials, the campaign that's being written by Egg Embry and myself, is actually going to have a Velithi character in it. So you'll be able to take that book and use this book, and you would have all of the stats for the character already, so you would not be creating it, and that would mean that you are able to use that character. Next, I have some information on the attributes and skills, and also the derived stats and how you calculate them. Sort of a summary version. The version in the core rulebook is significantly longer than that. I've also got a selection of the specialties. It's fairly limited. There are only 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, lucky for some, specialties in this book. I should say, by the way, if anyone's having trouble with the quality of the video, I'm told that actually the replay has much better quality because my phone is actually uploading it straight onto Kickstarter rather than it being translated through the internet twice rather than once. Anyway, hopefully you can see a rough idea, and hopefully you can see sort of this image here and so on as I flick through them. We've then got a limited selection of implants, just 3 to choose from: the auto-injector, the facial morph, and the subdermal armor. Honestly, they're my 3 personal favorites. I usually have at least 2 of these 3 in any character that I build, but there are many other options that you will not get to choose with just character creation in the Rulebook Primer. And then we go into weapons, and again, there's a relatively limited selection. You probably saw some knives and swords on this page. And then over the page, we've got we've got 2 types of ammunition. We've got auto pistol, assault rifle, laser pistol, and sniper rifle. So we don't have the shotgun. We don't have various different kinds of grenades. We've only got the one kind of grenade, rather than smoke grenades, flash grenades, EMP grenades, and so on. We've got 3 types of armor here: light, medium, and heavy. That's all of the types of armor. But there's an additional suit that you can use in the core rulebook, and we've also got the briefing on shields. We've got a few limited pieces of equipment as a selection. We've got hacking equipment. We've got a plasma cutter for engineering. We've got a computational targeting interface for gunnery, and we've got the medical intervention gel and painkillers, which are the 2 main pharmaceuticals that you may use during the game. We then move on to the rules, and there is actually, with the exception of the space combat that I mentioned earlier, there is actually the full set of rules in this book. So you've got all about how you play the Era D10 rule set. You've got the attribute checks. You've got the equipment information. You've got how to work together and in parallel, notoriety, luck points, all of that stuff. Damage and healing on this page, which deals with taking damage and how you heal it, and how you survive when you actually take critical damage. Then we've got statuses. Again, this is exactly as in the core rulebook, including stealth mode and so on. I tell a lie, it's not exactly the same as in the rulebook. You don't have information about survival mode here, which is included in the core rulebook. We've then got combat, entering combat and initiative and sneak attacks and all of that stuff, all the stuff you'd usually expect to see. We've got the full unarmed combat rules here. That's 1 page, 2 pages, and a flow chart that actually explains those 2 pages. So that's our 3 pages of unarmed combat rules. We've then got melee combat, all on 1 page there, ranged combat on the opposite page, and thrown combat, AoE damage, and then we're straight on into the GM section where we talk about gaining experience, and we give you one of the tables. I think there are 3 tables in the main rulebook of character stats to give you an idea of what you might be facing. Again, in the actual campaigns, we'll often give you enemies that you're going to face, and this here is the glossary of terms, so you can understand what we're talking about when we talk about success margin, just quickly and easily inside the back cover. Also inside the back cover, we've got the character sheet. That's true of pretty much every book. Not quite all, but very nearly. So that is the Rulebook Primer. As I say, really the summary of that is it's got everything that you need in order to play the game. There's a lot of history that's not there, but you can pair it up with any of our other expansions and still use it. So you can still use it with the Secret War expansion I'm going to explain in a minute, for example, and you'll be able to play in full, no problems. So I'm just going to put that on one side, if I can find some space. There we go. And I'm going to pull out the Core Rulebook. So this is the main rulebook for Era of the Consortium. The front cover image here may be very familiar to some of you. From there, I'm just going to open up this book and show you what it's got that the Rulebook Primer does not. So I'm going to skip over the solar system map again. We go into title page, lovely piece of artwork here for the title page. And then we go into actually the how to use this book section, which talks about what each of the parts is for. We've also got a complete table of contents with page numbers if you know that you want part 2, section 3, and you want to know what page to flick to. That's also, of course, in the digital version. So next we've got the part 1, the universe. We start off with the same double page, and then we jump straight into the history of Era of the Consortium. So this is a 500-year history. Now, instantly, that sounds like a lot to consume. So for anyone who's not already familiar with why, there are 500 years of history in this game, because the idea is that instead of just playing, one scenario, one kind of game with this book, you can actually play multiple ones by jumping into the right place in the history. So you can start with this region of the history where they're deconstructing the colony ship that they arrived on, and they are attempting to colonize this very first world. You can skip forward a bit, and you can do some political stuff if you want to, with the Senate and the Big Seven, and the Big Seven becoming powerful. You can skip forward again, and you can actually do some encounters with alien races. This is an image that, again, if you're familiar with us, you may have seen before. It's one of my favorites. This is the first contact with the Ulutians. Again, you can skip forward, and you can sort of go into a more technological age where wonders are actually achievable. They build the jump gates and venture through wormholes and go to other solar systems. And then you can play, if you jump a little further forward than that, you can play in the first contact with the Zimians. And I don't know if you can see this image, but there are some rather nasty, people are being ripped in half and stabbed and things. And unfortunately, first contact with the Zimians went very badly and resulted in this insectoid race attempting to wipe out the Consortium. So you can play against an alien invasion, sort of Starship Troopers style, if that's more the game you want to play. As you go on, there's a number of pieces on the bug war here. Humanity and the Consortium win the bug war, but not without doing something that's perhaps slightly morally questionable, I think is fair to say. We've then got what's called the Time of Enlightenment, where, well, before the Time of Enlightenment, I should say, there's a few more war atrocities, unfortunately, and the Zimian homeworld is actually destroyed by a particular weapon. However, then we move on to the Time of Enlightenment, and again, some of you might be familiar with this image, which I'm also using as the front cover of Predictive Genetic Algorithm. It's one of my favorites. Really shows off the Aleutians very well, I feel. Yeah, so the Time of Enlightenment involved sort of the transhumanism aspect, a little bit of the cyberpunk aspect as people became more integrated with technology. Here is an example of a mechanical arm that was built by an Elliot Dragon, who will become important later in the story. And then as you move on, you have the opportunity to fight as part of the resistance against the Consortium, who are attempting to carry out a plot that will destroy many of the lives in the Ecounus system, the third star system that I introduced to you a minute ago. So all of that is totally accessible thanks to the history, and then we move on to, once again, the summary of the current situation that I mentioned before, and then on through the various factions. So again, we've got Hayden Bank and Smertios Security, but now we've got the rest of the big seven, big eight, I should say: CNC Colonization and Construction, the Mining Conglomerate, Hardcastle Haulage, Moritascus Pharmaceuticals, and Gaia Adaptation and Adjustment, and finally Open Technology in the Senate, who you'll recognize from the Rulebook Primer. We've then got 6 more more minor factions, including Crone Correction, which runs Sirona and is actually the company in charge in the Sirona Specials campaign. We've got CN, Consortium News, Garhay Industries, who developed the Shield, Raven Optics, who were behind lasers the first time, Lug Chartered Records, who is actually technically the people in charge of the entire consortium, although they have a lot less power than they should have, and Kakalatak, which is a Zimian-founded company. Finally, we've got the resistance pages here, which are the same as in the Rulebook Primer. We then move on to the places, and every single planet in the consortium has a page of its own that explains all of the various things that you would need to know as reference. Now, all of this information is either stated or possible to glean out of the history itself, but I'm a GM. I like to turn to a single page where I can find out what is the background of how Tyrannus became the way it is, what's the landscape, what does it look like on the actual planet, the population, how many human, how many Zimian, Valithi, what are the laws like on Tyrannus? What laws might my players fall foul of? What happens in terms of poverty? How are people dealt with? And finally, what's the tech level of the planet in general? Is everyone walking around with high-tech gadgets, or are they a bit more primitive? Now, for each one of the planets, that is Tyrannus, Nodens, Abnoab. There's Abnoab. Aeron, which is not technically a planet, but space station, but it's extremely large, with a population of 1.6 million. So we decided that probably it deserves its own page. Luxovius, Verbea, the industrial world. Lugus, where the Aleutians made their original home. Clota, the home of open technology. Sirona, which I've mentioned a few times now. Aron, one of the few planets with an atmosphere. Belisama, I want to show you the image for this, actually. I hope this comes through. Belisama is a planet where the Aleutians actually have sort of an underwater city, and the water is breathable for them. Essus, which is the Aleutian asteroid that they actually arrived in this solar system on. Yep, they shoot asteroids around. And finally, Robor and Anku, which have no indigenous population, share a page here. We then move on to various space stations. which have various roles. You've got all of the information you need to explore these space stations and everything that you should need to know about them in order to visit and play on them. The Hardcastle haulage trading post will actually become very important when I start talking about free trader. So that's the end of the places, and I'm now moving on to the races. So the races include humans, which you can see here. You've then got Eulutians, which are squid-like individuals who squeeze themselves into human-shaped suits in order to better, in order to better interact with humanity. I don't know if you can see that image. Hopefully you can. Right here. We've then got the Simians, and these race pages give you all of the information that you need about every species. Finally, we've got the Vilithi. So they talk about the history and how the species joined the Consortium. They talk about what Vilithi society is like, or indeed all of the societies, and what they're like. Excuse me. They talk about each of the societies and what those societies are like. They talk about how these creatures are simple creatures with no self-awareness, whereas the so-called manipulators down here know not because they manipulate individuals, but because they are able to manipulate objects. How they are really the majority of the population of the Vilithi, who are sentient. It talks about their biology. It talks about their age, their maximum age and when they die of old age, when they die of oxygen deprivation, or when they die of food, lack of food. It talks about their language, and it talks about how they are named. And in particular, the Vilithi are interesting in that, if you don't know, they actually use short phrases, such as the breeze on the leaves of a tall tree, or the agility of a bird in the sky. Now, what they do, because humans aren't so good at remembering that entire thing, they have a tendency to reduce that down. So they might call them breeze or bird instead of their entire name. So that brings us to the end of part 1. And I will now continue on to character creation and just explain my way through that. So again, we've got the background. This time we have the entire creation rules. So that includes humans and also Eulutians, but both forms of Eulutians this time. Rather than just having the one suit, this one you might recognize from the Rulebook Primer, we also have the larger and stronger Willa suit. They don't only come in male. Each one has both a male and a female form. That gives the opportunity to choose whether you want to be a dexterous Vilithi or a strong, Eulutian, or a strong Eulutian. Next, we've got the Simians, and again, all 3 casts are ready. Shades of Vengeance Comics. Reduce the width of your screen so that it's more portrait, and you'll get a slightly better view of what you want to see. I'm trying as much as possible to keep the interesting stuff in the middle. So you can play as a Simian politician, or you can play as a Simian worker, as was offered in the Rulebook Primer. But you can also play as a Simian brain. Now, each of these have their own specific extra abilities. The workers are particularly strong, the brains are particularly smart, and the political cast are particularly charismatic. Finally, we've got the Vilithi, which you can play as, which you can create a character for in this book. So the Vilithi, there are actually 4 forms. One which is humanoid, so 2 arms, 2 legs. One which is multi-legged, which moves faster than your average Vilithi. And one which is multi-armed, which can carry extra weapons and is better in combat, but is also easier to damage. And finally, we have the no-limbed form, which we affectionately call the Stump. And it has no limbs, it is unable to move, but it is extremely tough. I don't think any of the Vilithi taste like Snickers, as far as I know. I've never eaten a Vilithi. Oh, I know what you're referring to. Yes, what he's asking about is a slightly anecdotal story that I sometimes tell about the Consortium. This is one of the things that I definitely consider canon. But these little individuals here, they're called collectors. And what they do is they collect sunlight and they store that in sort of sap. And the manipulators, and also various others when there were others in the society, would stick sort of suck the sap out of these small collectors, as they're called, and that was how the society worked. And they mostly wouldn't feed themselves; they'd be fed by the collectors. Now, what happened was when that society was overthrown, the collectors were actually set loose to walk around on the streets. And right here on its back, you can actually see a device which will freeze dry the sap and actually eject it in return for sort of a credit donation to the collector. So they run around and they sort of bump into your knees, asking you to give them money for the sap. It's somewhat, I've described it before as somewhat like a Snickers bar, so I imagine that's where that came from. So the backstory, there are numerous backstories for both Consortium and Resistance in this book. You can see here that's 2 pages, 3 pages of Consortium, and then 2 pages of Resistance backstories, which you can use as a guideline in order to develop your character. From the Consortium, you know, you might be a Moritascus Pharmaceuticals medic, like this individual here. Or alternatively, from the Resistance, perhaps you're an assassin, or maybe you're one of their surveillance experts who taps into the surveillance cameras and sort of monitors Consortium activity. We go through morals, we go through quirks, neither of which are actually in the Rulebook Primer in detail. And then we have an appearance section. Again, this is one of my favorite images right here. Of sort of a subway car, in inverted commas, a high-tech subway car, and the story being told by this image is phenomenal. I love it. So we then move on to, again, a description of the statistics, and you can see here that I've taken a lot more space because all of them were in 1 page on the previous in the Rulebook Primer, and here I've got an entire page for the attributes, an entire page for the derived stats, and then 2 entire pages for the skills to go through them all in detail and explain when you might use them, why why esteem is better than persuasion or intimidation or seduction on the occasions you can use it, and so on. Next, I've got the specialties. So we've got a huge selection of specialties here, at least 1 for every single skill. Plus some miscellaneous ones. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of specialties for skills, and then miscellaneous specialties and racial specialties. So you can actually get a bonus for being a Zimian or a Lutian or a Valithi. You can actually have an extra thing, which the others won't get. So all of the specialties are listed here. That's 6 pages of specialties. And then we go on to leveling up, which is covered in the same way that it is in the Rulebook Primer. But we've also got this helpful diagram here, which just reminds you at a glance 1 attribute per level, 2 skills per level, 1 implant per level up to your maximum stamina, and 1 specialty for most levels. I'd say about half the levels you get a specialty. So that's the end of the character creation section. We then move on to implants, equipment, and vehicles. And moving straight on to implants, you can see already there's a large range of implants. They're actually 6.5, 7.5 pages. No, 5.5 pages. I just can't count. I'm sorry. 5.5 pages of implants, which allow you to have various things, including the ones which were in the Rulebook Primer, such as the subdermal armor, but also including one of my favorites, which is the Schrodinger's implant, which can turn into any other implant because it's not been observed. Then when you decide what it is, it changes and it can never change back. We then go on to the weapons. So again, we've got the combat knives and the swords, which you can see. We've also got cudgels. We've got the monomolecular whip. And that's a fun one. For a long time, we talked about whether using the whip should actually have a serious impact by fumbling and actually damage yourself if you fumble with it, because you whip yourself in the face with a monomolecular whip, which would hurt. For the ranged weapons, we actually have 6 sets of ammunition, from armor-piercing rounds to kinetic breaches, which ignore shields, slicer rounds, which cause bleeding, tangle rounds, which are non-lethal. So we've got a bow and arrow. We've also got the auto pistol and the assault rifle that you'll recognize from the primer. But in addition to that, we've got a few extras. We've got the submachine gun, which actually has the fastest. Indeed, Indiana Jones did cut his chin with a whip in the 3rd movie, and actually I think that was what inspired us to talk about it in the first place. We've got the Needler, which is used as a sort of stealth weapon, totally silent. We've got the Tangle Tape Sprayer, which is designed to only immobilize your opponent rather than kill them. We've also got the Combat Shotgun, which I mentioned before was missing, and the Flamethrower, one of my favorites. I have a lot of favorites in this game, I'll be honest. Yes, the whip is somewhat deadly. The flamethrower is not included in the Rulebook Primer. We also have the experimental and secret weapons, which are actually designed to kill aliens while leaving humans relatively unharmed, which is somewhat distasteful to most people. In fact, anyone who watches, either played or watches our upcoming video of the True Play session that we did at EtherCon, they actually ran into this, and I was very happy to be able to sort of have them role play in a way that I felt was realistic. So yes, we've got anti-Eulutian, anti-Zimian, and anti-Velithi weapons, but no anti-human weapons. We've then got grenades, flashbangs, gas grenades, smoke grenades, explosive charges, and EMP grenades. So we have loads of grenades here. You're right, actually. Bullets are particularly effective against humans, and that's actually the reason that we originally chose that. But as I started making the story, I realized that actually I wanted this to be a specific thing, that they're developing anti-alien weapons. But in the very original version that some of you may have heard me talk about, which was the 24-hour game at Durham University, where this whole thing began. Actually, that was the reason that we made the anti-Eulutian and anti-Zimian weapons. I've been asked by Alex Carpenter, is there or will there be an anti-fifth race weapon? Well, that's a very interesting question. I guess you'll have to wait and see. Do you think that the Consortium is still going to try to eliminate all aliens? If you think yes, then I suspect the answer will be yes. However, it's not yet been revealed what happened. We've then got some heavier weapons. We've got anti-tank mines, anti-personnel mines, a disposable rocket launcher, which is one of my favorites. I just love the concept of a rocket launcher that you fire and then throw away. And then heavy weapons such as a normal rocket launcher, able to be used constantly. We've got a minigun and an automatically loaded rocket launcher, which is available only on a certain kind of vehicle. We then move on to armor, and as with the Rulebook Primer, we have light, medium, and heavy armor. We also have the stealth suit, which I mentioned earlier while I was going through the primer. This is not available in the Rulebook Primer. It does not offer you any armor at all, but it allows you to turn invisible. Think Predator. You're not totally undetectable, but you are very hard to see. We've then got several pages of skill-enhancing equipment. And then some pages of medicines and drugs, which includes the skill pill, which actually trebles your skill of a nominated skill for 5 minutes, and then it reduces to 0 for 2 hours. So it's brilliant for a last minute, oh no, we need the crunch, but make sure that you don't use it too early or you might regret it. We've got some various bits and pieces such as gas mask and oxygen tank, spacesuit, and vision enhancing devices that finish off the sort of personal equipment here. And then we move on to mounted weapons in planetary and space combat, from 30mm tank cannons and long-range missiles to explosive mines and electromagnetic mines, which are designed to be launched into space. Next, we've got the strike weapons, the substance transportation by rapid induction of kinetic energy. And you will find very quickly, as I go through the next few pages, I really like acronyms. These were actually developed in transit during the journey from Earth to Consortium space, and were developed into weapons en route, much to the disappointment of the creator. We've also got laser cannon weapon systems. And we've got the weapons that the Zimians use in space combat, specifically the acid sprayer and the acid projectile launching system, which was developed during the Bug War. Next, we move on to vehicles. So here we have the disarm mech, which is capable of carrying either 2 rocket launchers, or 2 miniguns, or 2 flamethrowers, or any combination of single weapons, 1 on each arm. That gives it quite a significant advantage, not to mention the fact that it actually has vehicle-level armor, which makes it very difficult to destroy using conventional weapons. Again, in the True Play session, and also in the very first episode of Claymore Unit by Dice and Stuff, they face down a disarm. And I'm pretty sure they steal a disarm at some point as well, unless I'm getting confused. But anyway, then we have the MUT, armored terrain, multi-gun armed universal terrain transport. We have tanks, we have aircraft, we have shuttles which are unarmed and cargo shuttles, drop pods, mining scouts. We have pages and pages of combat and non-combat vehicles. Here are the fighters that you're likely to encounter. And we have light cruisers, medium cruisers. We even have pirate ships, illegally armed freighters, heavy cruisers, carriers, and the Orion. The Orion is the largest ship in Consortium space so far that is actually still flying. It is 5 kilometers long and 3 in diameter, and it is the ship on which the last stand of Stiletto unit session takes place. We then have the Zimian craft. So during the Bug War, the Zimians had their own fighters and fighters and cruisers and carriers, I should say. And they use these to devastating effects against the Consortium, and the stats for all of them are right here. We've got a few of the space station stats, and then we've got an entire double page devoted to security measures which you may run into, from biometric scans and cargo inspection to spot searches and ship ID checks. Anything that you might run into while you're passing through a checkpoint. And that brings us to the end of the equipment and weapons. We're then on to the rules, which again are very, very similar to the Rulebook Primer rules. They've got the survival mode, which I mentioned was not in the Rulebook Primer, right here. That lets you choose to go into survival mode, and actually you are then much harder to kill. You're able to tank a lot more stuff, as long as you can stay in survival mode, which requires rolls. We've then got the unarmed combat, the ranged combat, melee, ranged. And as you can see, we've got a bit more space in this section. We've got a page to describe it, and then an entire page for the flowchart here. AoE, we've got vehicle combat, and we've got the space combat as well. So you can follow through space combat, and that's what I was mentioning about the free trader expansion. I recommend that you have the space combat. Then we've got a few pages about attribute and skill use, about where you might use any given attribute, and how they are useful and how they're combined. Just a bit more detail for anyone who is unsure about what they're doing. We've also got some information about how you use. Excuse me. We've also got some information about how you use interpersonal skills, and some indicative numbers for bribes, because you never know. We've then got the GM section here. So we start with a page and a half about some various thoughts that we came up with while we were playing and playtesting this game, which cover all kinds of things from unlimited ammunition, that is unlimited, not infinite. Please don't be like that player. And reducing skills. For example, if you decide that your character only knows psychology, not medicine, then you can actually reduce that, and you get a +2 benefit for doing so. So you can actually be better than anyone else at that if you sort of subdivide. That is at the GM's discretion. We then go on to the suggested campaigns, which run through the entire history of the Consortium, giving information about the kinds of sessions that you might play during those periods. We've got hardcore rules that go into how you might make the rules a bit harder, make it a little more challenging for your players if they're having too much immediate time of it. These are quite nasty, including instant kills actually killing you, gaining penalties for having less than 2 in any attribute, less than or equal to 2 in any attribute. So if you're below average, then you actually have negatives. Electromagnetic pulse permanently disables everything, and you have to actually replace the equipment and the implants if they're hit by them. We then move on to worked examples. We've got a worked example of combat, and we've got a worked example of space combat, just to make sure that everyone is 100% clear on how those run. We've got an appendix here with example fumble outcomes. For example, if you fumble with commercial, maybe you get suckered by a micro bubble in the local stock market, invest, and lose all of your money. Just in case people are having trouble thinking of some interesting options that may happen. Pilot here, I've got you jab the buttons so hard that they cease to function, which I'm sure you can imagine is pretty unpleasant for a pilot. Next, we've got a double page of characters that you might come across in the world, with complete stats and even armor, weapons, and equipment they will be in possession of. We've then got several pages of example playable characters. If you don't want to roll your own, or it's your first time and you want to try something quickly, we've got some example playable characters right here on this double page for exactly that purpose, and that double page. We've then got a full index. So what I've done is I've separated the index into a story index and a gameplay index, which means that the story terms that you want to seek out, you're not going to start getting confused with, for example, riposte the medium cruiser and riposte the move in combat. We've then got the gameplay index right there, and then I'd like to just call attention to this. These individuals are actually the backers who backed the original Era of the Consortium Kickstarter. At least one of them is on this livecast right now, Alex Carpenter, whose name is right there. Thank you very much for coming back, Alex. It's great to have you back with us. I'm sure there are many others as well, but I've not seen any other names pop up that I could easily identify, so I'm picking on Alex. Everyone who backed the original Kickstarter is on this page, and rightly so, in my opinion. Thank you very much to anyone who is watching who is on this page. You helped make this book possible originally. It's really something. Finally, we've got the glossary and character sheet, exactly the same as the Rulebook Primer.